Hi everyone, and welcome back to the third and final part now of the biological explanations of gender. So the third concept that we're going to take a look at together now is evolutionary explanations. And again, this is all kind of stuff that you're already familiar with from where I've taught you previous evolutionary explanations. But the main thing that we're going to be focusing on here is this idea that male and female roles, or masculine and feminine identities, as it says in your booklet here, are simply a result of kind of hangovers from our evolutionary past, i.e. there were certain ways in which men and women needed to behave when we were evolving for survival purposes. But because society changes at a much faster rate than genetics, all right, and we only evolve at a very, very slow pace, men and women therefore tend to still behave in these ways which were present in our ancestral history, and society just simply hasn't caught up yet. Okay, so this is again this idea of an evolutionary hangover. Okay, so in that sense, what we're stating is that men and women who displayed certain characteristics or behaved in certain ways were much more likely to survive. Number one, they were allowed access to resources, and number two, they were much more likely to attract a partner, obviously for reproduction purposes, and those genes will have been passed on. Okay, so in the EEA, so when men and women, modern men and women were evolving, these adaptive traits would have been beneficial for survival. So what were the adaptive traits? For females, the adaptive traits were to be nurturing and caring. Now, this would ensure survival because it would allow them to stay in one place, form bonds with their child. Okay, so that's known as attachment theory. They had these kind of maternal instincts, maternal drives, which helped them to form these really healthy relationships with their children, allowed them to live and then pass on those maternal genes to the surviving offspring. Okay, so that nurturing and caring element that we associate with even modern females now, that's come from that survival need when we were evolving a very, very long time ago. On the flip side, males in that era needed to be aggressive and they needed to be strong, and it was all to do with provision elements, okay, to survival. They needed to be providing resources not only for themselves but for their sexual partners and also their offspring. So the males who were not strong at that point in time would have unfortunately died out. So therefore what we end up with is what we call dominant male theory, where the vast majority of males that were present in the EEA were strong, they were powerful, they were highly skilled, they were crafted in terms of trades and hunting, and that's because all of those things gave them access to partners and to resources, which thus enabled survival. So that's why in the EEA men had to be aggressive and strong, and still today, because society has not quite caught up, when you get a male that's not seen as aggressive or not seen as strong, and they're actually seen as more of a female role, then it's a bit jarring, and it still today takes you aback a little bit. And it's because these behaviours and these aspects of masculinity and femininity are just so simply hardwired into our DNA, because they did help survival in such a huge way. So that's the first aspect of evolutionary explanations, this idea of the dominant male theory being strong and powerful because it increases chances of survival, and then comparing that then with feminine characteristics of nurture and being caring and having those maternal drives. The next and final part that we're going to focus on is the impact that evolution has had on what we would call domestic roles or labour roles. Because obviously we've just said men and women had to behave in certain ways in the EEA, that has then transferred or been passed on down the generations to create a division of labour. So The division of labour, as it says in your booklet there, is the allocation of different types of jobs or different types of work that men and women kind of partake in, if you want, to ensure reproductive success. Now, even though society is changing at a very, very slow rate, most societies still have traditional gender roles. Two genders. Not really many societies recognise the non-binary and the multitude of other gender identities that we're now aware of. They see it as two genders still, men and women, and that men have specific types of job and women have specific types of job. And it does go back to the necessity for those types of jobs when we were evolving, but even closer in terms of time to us than that men and women needed to fulfill certain jobs rather, which does just create that division of household labour. So nearly every society, as we've just said, uses gender as a way to divide household labour, and naturally men do certain things and females do certain things. So in Western society, still today, I would argue, a woman's main role is caring responsibilities and household chores. I think there is a shift that men are getting better, and it's seen less unusual when men engage in these types of activities. But I would say that for the vast majority of families, the female is still, the matriarch. She is the person who looks after the children. She's got those caring responsibilities, as well as most of the household chores. And then we've obviously got all the domestic chores, such as cooking, cleaning, sewing, and what have you, okay? Men, on the other hand, again, still very much in traditional households, I would argue. A man is responsible for a lot of the fixing, so DIY, building, crafting, farming if you're living in rural communities. Less so the things that we previously associate with women, such as caring. Like I say, modern societies are getting a little bit better in terms of not having as clear of a division. But I think if you think of your own experiences, your own family, whilst there might be some anomalies where you might get men taking on more of the nurturing role and a woman who is more skilled in terms of DIY, I think we've talked about that in the past. I'd say that the vast majority of households are still fixed into these divisions of labours. So that's in the vast majority of societies. Like I say, society just has not moved as fast as what we think it has. And in other non-Western cultures or non-Western societies, women make rope while men make ritual pottery, or women fish while men build musical instruments. So there are cultures and societies that exist around the world which have shifted the gender division of labour, but most traditional societies have still got fixed notions of what is man and what is woman, okay? So that excuse me, is the basics in terms of the division of labour. We've now just got a little bit of extra material that you might want to read and highlight. So gender division of labour traditionally, so kind of 150, 200 years ago, I'd say it was really important. Since many jobs take time and effort to learn, to practice, and got to hone those skills over time, it actually served a purpose in terms of productivity for man to only do one set of things and woman to do another, okay? So girls could learn to do the labour expected of women and boys the labour expected of men. And seeing as though it was difficult to learn the skills associated with all household tasks, it was just a very efficient way of dividing the labour up. So no man nor woman could do both sets of skills. They only learn one set of skill just to save time and make each man and each woman more effective and more efficient in what they were actually doing. So that's just a little bit of elaboration there. So what we're going to just have a look at now, excuse me, is a little bit more exam work So this is the second question. Again, if you're not being able to print this out, we're just going to do this on paper and we'll take a look at it when we come back into class. So Ben thinks that doing well in maths and science is important for his future. He believes it is important for men to have well-paid jobs. Question portion says, describe, so it's got to be an expanded answer, how evolutionary psychology could be a reason for Ben believing that men should have well-paid jobs. So this question is worth 3 marks, and it is a describe question. Now, if we break it down a little bit, here, you need to just give basically one reason, and there are going to be 3 marks available for kind of expanding that concept. So if you think now, have your booklet in front of you, highlight one reason, okay, from what we've just done on evolutionary psychology, why Ben believes that a man should have a well-paid job. Which element do you think works best with that? Where has that idea come from for Ben? Why is he experiencing that idea? So take a few seconds, maybe pause this here. Which aspect of evolutionary psychology that we've just covered do you think works best there? Okay, so let's just have a look at the mark scheme, because there are 3 different answers that are offered here. You can pick any one of them if you want to answer this. But like I said, you're picking one reason why Ben thinks in that way and just expanding it with terminology and obviously applying it to him. So the first bullet point, the first offered response, is having a well-paid job would enable Ben to provide for his family. Okay, so that's your starting point. If Ben can provide for his family, then Ben's children would have a good chance of survival into adulthood. So that's the main premise of evolutionary theory. And thus they'll be more likely to have children of their own. So I think that is taking a very, very basic idea and cleverly expanding it. So provide for his family will survive, and they'll go on to reproduce. That's enough to get you 3 marks. Second bullet point down, I prefer a little bit more. So having a well-paid job will help Ben to attract a mate. That would get you 1 mark. At that point, then he will have children and he will be able to provide for them with resources, and then his partner, the female equivalent, can look after the children. Okay, so you get a little bit more in that answer, all right, for 3 marks. And then the last one, having a well-paid job will enable Ben to attract a mate, so that Ben is more likely to have healthy children or reproduce, and that means his genes are being passed on to future generations. Now, what we don't get in this mark scheme is reference to kind of the key terminology that we've just covered. So if you wanted to now, you can take any one of those answers, but maybe try and build in, one of these key ideas. So we've got male dominance theory, suggesting that masculine characteristics are useful for mating, and also the division of labour applies to that second bullet point, where men are providing the material resources and females are carrying out those domestic or nurturing roles. So you could try and build in one of those key terms there as well. Okay, so that's all the descriptive material completed now for the evolutionary explanations. So now we're going to take a look at the 2 evaluation points, always the same as what we have here. So we've got a piece of supporting evidence and we've got alternative explanations as well. So divide your booklet up into the 2 halves as we would normally do. If you want to just take a moment very quickly to fill in the alternative explanations here, so I'll just read it through with you and then you can pause the video and get this copied up. But gender could be better explained by a theory that we've already covered at the start of the gender topic, which is social learning theory. Whilst children do inherit certain chromosomes which make them biologically male or female, they're actually more likely to acquire their sense of gender identity from modelling same-sex parents. And we already know that if they identify with the parent, then they will imitate this behaviour. And that's what possibly gives them a strong sense of male or female masculinity versus femininity, not the chromosomes that they've inherited. So pause this here, take a moment just to write in your alternative explanation. Okay, so with that done, make sure you've highlighted your bits of terminology there. Let's just now go ahead and have a look at the supporting evidence. I've done it as a gap fill, which I always would do. So let's just read this and you can be seeing if you can figure out the words that go in here just as we go through it. So evidence suggests that something biological processes, including what we would call mutations in certain something. So what do you think those two words are? What would we class a mutation as with the words that we've got there? So can lead to abnormal gonadal development. Remember, your gonads are what all fetuses or embryos have. They are neither male nor female sex reproductive organs. Gonads are at that point where the child is neither male or female. I know traditionally we say that all children are female to begin with, but gonad is the term that we would use to describe before you get the development of the womb, the ovaries, the testes, etc. So these abnormalities can lead to abnormal gonadal development, causing some fetuses to present with indifferent gender. That's clear and obvious, I think, that one. And to be reassigned at birth to the default. Now, what did we say is the default sex? This shows that something of genetic, that M word is a word that I've used already in that paragraph, can shape our biological what? So just have a read back through those. If we were doing it in class, how many of those words do you think you've been able to figure out? The correct answers are as follows. So evidence suggests that abnormal biological processes, including mutations in certain genes, so this is all the disorders, excuse me, that we were talking about before, like Turner's syndrome, Klinefelter's syndrome, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, all of those kind of disorders can lead to abnormal gonadal development, causing some fetuses to present with indifferent gonads. And in those situations, if you recognise that that child is going to be born that way, those children are often assigned a sex at birth. And it's easier to assign female sex at birth than it is to assign the male sex, because obviously if they're missing, let's say, for example, the SRY gene, or they've got abnormalities in terms of that chromosomal structure, it's easier to reassign them as female. So this shows that inheritance, all right, so genetic inheritance of mutations can and does shape our biological sex, okay? So with that, the evaluation completed now, you should have filled in this 9-mark plan for genetics and for neurochemistry. All we need to do now is go ahead and add on the limitation and the strength. But remember, there's only a handful of you in our class that would do both the limitation and the strength. Vast majority of you, I would always say, are just going to aim to do a limitation, so offer that alternative argument, all right? So spend a couple of minutes now just rounding that off and finishing off the limitation. When you come back into class, we'll do a series of like tasks and activities. A few gap fills. I've got a multiple choice that we're going to do together just to ensure that you've understood all this stuff on the biological explanation of gender. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope there's been kind of no problems with all of that material. Okay, I'll see you when you get back into class, guys.